I've been looking forward to this interview for a few weeks now. Matt Crawford is with us this morning as well, lined this up for us. And it's a subject matter that's very, very important to be educated about. Joining us this morning, author Walt Sturgeon, who has got some books. You have a couple books out, don't you?
Yes, two.
Two. And it's regarding mushrooms, which can be very dangerous. Walt, how long have you been interested in mushrooms, and are you quite a eater of mushrooms?
Well, I am an eater of mushrooms. That's not my primary interest, but I have been collecting edible mushrooms for 50 years.
Really?
And but I seriously got into mushrooms back in the mid 70s, as far as the science, which is called mycology, the study of fungi, and I'm interested in the larger fungi, the mushrooms. Now, mushrooms don't always have an umbrella shape. They can be a variety of forms. We call them all mushrooms. That doesn't really have a meaning. Macrofungi means big enough to pick up and hold and see. Toadstool, same thing. Some people think toadstool is a poisonous mushroom. To them it is. It really has no meaning.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, to one individual would call a mushroom a toadstool because they just are ignorant about it.
Right.
I might collect it and eat it because I know it's really good to eat.
Okay.
Okay, so it doesn't have any serious meaning, just like mushroom could refer to a poisonous species or an edible species. Button refers to a baby mushroom. It doesn't refer to a kind of mushroom. It's a baby mushroom.
Right.
So you have that dichotomy there. But anyhow, I've eaten since I was a kid puffballs and morels and field mushrooms. But now I don't know how many kinds I've eaten, probably 100.
Really?
But I don't, most of them are not that special. If you're hungry, they're okay. Now there's some that are special.
Yeah.
But to go out just because they're free and grow in the woods, no, that's not my interest.
Well, you're from Cleveland area?
Actually closer to Pittsburgh. I'm in East Palestine, Ohio, which is 40 minutes from the Pittsburgh airport, 20 miles south of Youngstown.
Gotcha. Now, about, was it a couple, 3 years ago, Matt, there were some kids or something in Cleveland area that ate mushrooms, and I don't know if any of them died, but they had terrible organ damage done.
The liver.
The liver.
That's right. There was, I've done consulting for poison centers, and occasionally I get calls or emails. There was a bad case in Cleveland with an Asian family at a Chinese restaurant.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, the Chinese family that runs the restaurant eat together. Unfortunately, they didn't serve these to people in the community.
Yeah.
But they made soup, and there were 2 or 3 liver transplants in that family.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was really bad. And a couple years ago, there were 3 different groups hospitalized when mushrooms were really out in the fall. One was Chinese, one was Thai. Both countries have an edible mushroom that looks like our poisonous mushroom. And the other group was a guy that had taken him into his favorite tavern and fed all these mushrooms to his friends. So there were 3 groups of people, all hospitalized at Cleveland, I believe, University Medical Center.
Maybe that's the one I'm thinking of.
Could be. And they survived. They've used a milk thistle, something from a milk thistle, or a chemical similar to that. I guess they lived probably with liver damage, though.
Last fall, I had these mushrooms sprouting up in my lawn because I think of the rain or whatever, the dampness that we were experiencing at the time.
Yeah, they tend to fruit right after it rains.
And would those be poisonous? Well, you wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know without seeing them. Could be not.
I got rid of them because I didn't want my dog eating them.
Right, and dogs do eat them. I get calls from dogs being poisoned and killed sometimes.
Really?
And other creatures eat them. I got a call on alpaca, not llama, but alpaca eating some. Dogs are the most common.
Really?
Yeah, they eat them. The mushroom that you see at the store or that you get in your yard is actually a fruit of a fungus. The fungus is still in your yard, by the way. It's underneath the ground, doing whatever it's doing, consuming maybe recycling material. They do recycle things. They could be parasitizing your lawn. They could be doing other things as well, but they're generally beneficial. But they're there, and then when conditions are they've consumed enough, they work up the energy, the water comes, and during the drying cycle, usually they appear as mushrooms. And they may come up once a year, they may come up every month, they may come up every 5 years. It's no rhyme or reason, depending on the conditions.
You know, I was a little boy. Our family, somebody in the family owned a cabin that was in the mountains up in Pennsylvania, and it was a long drive, I remember. But when we went there, I had an older lady that was with us that went around and took these mushrooms off of trees. They're kind of flat, and she used to be able. She was a very good artist, and she used to draw on these mushrooms.
Right.
And they were like keep things. I mean, a lot of people kept them over the years, and they had them in the family and stuff. Now, are those considered mushrooms?
Well,
or?
again, macrofungi is a better name because
Okay.
they're not an umbrella shape, but yes, we call them mushrooms.
Okay.
Again, no scientific name.
Yeah,
And
she
that's
knew what she
actually,
was doing, but I
that's
mean,
actually an artist conch.
you've heard of that.
And if you go to, I don't, but if you go to craft shows, and they're there all the time with some pretty good artwork.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when we go to a mushroom event, somebody will take a toothpick and you can just scratch them and make if you're artistic, and in commemoration of that event, and they'll do the date and draw a deer or something on it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's a common event.
We have that artist conch out at the trail that we're going to later.
Okay.
You have to make sure that's what it is. That's what I call it.
That probably is very common. And it's one of the few that the fruiting body, which is what I refer to mushrooms as, because they're kind of like fruit, is a perennial. It grows like a tree. It'll get rings on it, maybe 8 years, 7 years. I don't know how long they last. Most mushrooms don't do that.
Is there any way of knowing? I had a discussion the other day with somebody, and they said, you know, if you don't know anything about mushrooms, the best thing to do is stay away from them. Is there any sign of something on one of these that would tell you that you don't want to eat it?
Well, unfortunately, no. You have to learn them one at a time.
Really?
Just like you learn poison ivy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't eat that, and you might eat dandelion greens. They're different. They're both plants, but they're different. And you learn to recognize the differences, and it's the same way with mushrooms. If you don't know them, some of them are really bad. But probably, if you went out in the woods and indiscriminately ate green plants, you'd probably get into as much trouble as you would mushrooms. For some reason, people tend to generalize with mushrooms, especially the white ones, which can be really bad. And, oh, it's white, it looks harmless. There's no general rule. There are lots of superstitions or beliefs, like if a mushroom cooked with a silver coin turns the coin black, some people find that to be an indicator of poison.
Really?
Or a piece of garlic doing the same thing, turning black. Does it peel or not peel? Does it grow on wood or not grow on wood? And interestingly, you'll hear it's edible if it grows on wood, or you'll hear it's poisonous if it grows on wood. All these things, I can poison someone that'll pass every test that there is.
Really?
So, I mean, if I wouldn't want to, but if I wanted to,
I had a neighbor, an old timer that many years ago lived on the lakefront with me and or next to me, and he would go into the woods and he knew what he was doing, and he would bring these things home and make a steak and grill and do these mushrooms up. He was fine. I mean, he knew.
well, one of the reasons that people that use those rules they work is because they stick to the same kind of mushroom every year. That mushroom they know, and of course it passes the test.
Right.
So that's that, and yet people swear, well, Grandma did it this way and she never got sick. Well, yeah, Grandma used to use the same mushroom time and time again.
Yeah. There's a mushroom out that I particularly like, and I can't, for the life of me, can't think of them, but they're dark.
Portobello,
Portobello.
which actually is the same species as the white mushroom.
Really?
What the marketing of it is, it looks more palatable when it gets old, because the gills are kind of the same color as the top, and the bottom are kind of the same color. And older mushrooms have more flavor. Whereas the white mushroom, when it gets old, doesn't look so good, so it isn't so marketable. So they found a way to sell the more flavorful ones. It's a variety, same species.
I gotta ask you, when you eat your mushrooms, how do you cook them?
Well, each kind's different.
Yeah.
You can do things with mushrooms you wouldn't believe.
Right. Like what?
Oh, make ice cream, sorbet.
Really?
Oh yeah, some of them are like a fruit.
Never heard of such a
I'll,
thing.
we'll show a picture of one of those.
Okay.
I'm not a cook. I saute them in butter mostly.
Yeah.
And morels, which are the popular mushroom around here, the mushroom probably around here for folks, is lightly floured and fry them with a mixture of butter and oil so I can get them crisp on the outside. I like them a little crisp.
Making me hungry. I love mushrooms. Actually, there's not a whole, to me, there's not a whole lot of flavor to them.
Well, again, it depends on if you're eating mushrooms out of a can. Certainly, they're not very flavorful.
No,
They're not worth eating. They're rubbery, and I don't eat them out of a can. But some of the wild mushrooms can be hotter than the hottest pepper. Some of them,
Really?
Some of them can be a little bit sweet.
Do you have certain locations you go to collect these?
There's a lot of places where you're not allowed to collect in certain parks and places, so
Really?
you have to be careful where you're picking. You also have to be careful that where you're picking hasn't been sprayed with broadleaf weed killer, other toxins, insecticides, and so forth, because mushrooms will absorb that. So, but I have places I go, but I'm looking for mushrooms without thinking about it anywhere I am, including sometimes seeing them in the headlights of my car. I mean, it's become fixation, I guess. But I like to go to big woods. I go to Cook Forest in Pennsylvania. That's one of my places. And
Oh yeah, my buddy's going to Cook
and
Forest.
I live near Beaver Creek, Little Beaver Creek, which has 6,000 acres in the park and in some private land nearby that I have access to. So I spend a lot of time in the hill country there.
So it's basically a hobby.
It is a hobby. I've never had any training, but I've learned from joining a mushroom club, Iowa Mushroom Society, where we have events where there'll be a poisonous mushroom or an edible mushroom, and you look it up in the book, it says edible and wonderful, and then there's always that last line, but looks like such and such, which is poisonous. You get them both together, and you say, oh, I can tell the difference now. Or if I can't, someone can come over and show you that knows, an experienced person. So you learn from a mushroom club. You get a book. This is not my book, but get a good big book. And also use the internet. There's some good sources of mushroom identification on the internet.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, I got a question about this mushroom.
Yeah.
Last year we had a mushroom growing it shaped like a ball.
Okay, you're cutting in and out. I missed everything you just said.
Well, just what I wanted to say is about the mushroom. It's shaped like looks like a football.
Like a football.
And it's white.
And it's white.
I couldn't hear him.
He'd have to see it in person, I guess.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the call. Bye bye. All right. Yeah, the phone was cutting out. That's the trouble with cell phones.
Yes, very difficult. I did it.
Yeah. That's why I don't use mine.
Mine's turned off. Yeah, that's the artist conch. Very good.
Now we do have some footage that have you taken these pictures?
These are some pictures in no particular order other than alphabetical, and just to show some things.
Okay, and then I'll have you narrate.
Sure.
I want to remind everybody, if you're sending me emails for that contest, they're gone out the window, because I'm not taking names now on anything, whether it be email or telephone calls. We only will do that when we're just doing that. We're just doing an interview right now, okay? All right, what's this?
Okay, this is a common name, and unfortunately a lot of mushrooms don't have common names, but this one does. It's called the Destroying Angel, or Angel of Death. And it's, as you can see, white cap, white gills, that's the underside, and that white skirt-like ring. And a key feature at the bottom of the stem, which is when you collect a mushroom to identify it, you want to get the whole mushroom, so kind of dig it out with a knife. You see that egg-like or sac-like structure. Mushroom has emerged from an egg, so to speak. And one of these is sufficient to kill an adult individual. And
So that would be a poisonous one.
one of the very few, relatively few deadly poisonous mushrooms.
Really?
There's a lot of poisonous mushrooms that would make you sick. The key to this one is you eat it and you won't have any symptoms probably for 5, 6 hours, 8 hours.
Okay.
Eat it for dinner, wake up in the morning sick, and maybe not even relate it to the mushroom.
Really?
And then it's a long, arduous, torturous I've had to deal poison calls and people in intensive care for 2 weeks and so forth, and
Wow.
liver transplants sometimes. It attacks the liver. Common mushroom, it's actually a beneficial mushroom to trees. It forms a symbiotic relationship, as a lot of mushrooms do. It's bad for eating, but it's good for the environment.
Okay.
Called destroying angel. There are 2 or 3 Latin names, but I'm not going to throw those out.
Okay.
Okay, this one here is sometimes called the fly mushroom. Fly agaric, which is another name for mushroom. Poisonous, hallucinogenic, but not usually deadly poisonous, but it can make you sick in addition to causing visions. It also is used by certain Native American tribes for religious rites. It's been used as an intoxicant in Siberia and Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union. It's been used, there are whole books written about this mushroom. It's probably the most famous mushroom in the world.
Is that the kind that back in the 60s the hippies used
Well, not really. This one here actually is not a controlled substance, probably because it makes people sick. So it's one that people do eat it occasionally, but it is poisonous. Certainly not one that I've ever experimented with in any way, shape, or form.
It looks dangerous.
And yet there are people that eat it. And again, if you have a pine tree in your yard, not that it has to be a pine or a spruce, but very likely you have this mushroom. It's very common.
Really?
To make it illegal would be, people would be breaking the law all over the place. But anyhow, it is an interesting mushroom. The name, and this might be a folklore, but if you supposedly break it up and put it in milk, put some sugar on it, flies will come up and it kills the flies.
Really?
Supposedly. I've never tried it, and I've read recently that doesn't work. But the Latin name actually refers to flies, so I'm thinking maybe.
It might be.
Yeah, maybe. So it's Amanita muscaria. Muscaria refers to flies.
Is there a connection between tree host and
Yes. So certain mushrooms grow with certain trees. Some are generalists. A mushroom hunter looking for a certain mushroom is going to look under a particular kind of tree. This is a full-grown fly mushroom, just that expands out.
That there?
Yep. And again, like the first destroying angel, it starts out with in an egg, and those little patches you see, in this case, break is the top of that eggshell, if you want to think of it as that, are like cottage cheese all over the top of the cap. Really, that's not attached to the cap; it's just sitting on there. Well, it's attached, but you could rub it right off.
Oh, you do.
Okay, this is kind of an interesting one. This one here is in northeast Ohio. We have a fairly large Slavic and Polish population, and I'll butcher it because I'm neither, but they call this one popinki, or popinki, sometimes shortened to pinky. It's not pink. I think the translation is something like on or above or on the stump is what that means. And this one here is called the honey mushroom by other non-ethnic folks, and it grows in the summer usually, and it grows in big clusters, and it's a killer of trees. It is not a good thing to have in your woods, although it's everywhere, so it doesn't kill all the trees. One of the nice things or interesting things about it, I find a lot of things about mushrooms that have nothing to do with eating that are interesting, is again, this is the fruiting body. In the wood, where it is growing and consuming the wood, when it's fresh and growing really quickly, it glows in the dark. So it makes the wood look like it's glowing in the dark, and you might have heard the term foxfire. And foxfire refers to this mushroom's involvement with wood.
How could it kill a tree? It gets into
It just gets into the inner part of the tree, and mushrooms, they exude chemicals and digest the food outside of their bodies, and then they absorb it back in again. So that's what they would do any mushroom would do. Most of them, though, are not parasites. This is a parasite, but it also lives on dead material. It'll continue to grow.
That would be obviously dangerous to humans then.
It's edible. People eat it all the time.
Really?
Oh, popinki. This is edible.
See, I've never heard of that before.
Well, again, it depends on your ethnic group and what your family did. But honey mushroom is a very common. Armillaria mellia grows in the summer, generally speaking, but also in the fall. And there's another one in the fall that they call the same thing and closely related. This is okay. This is the one that grows in the fall, And this one is also interesting in that, again, you don't think about that underground part of the mushroom. But this one here is the largest organism on the planet, largest living organism. If you picked a mushroom at one end of the woods and went 2 miles away and picked a mushroom on the other end of the woods of the same kind, and genetically look at them, they are actually this one thing. So in other words, all that mass underneath the ground is one organism. And they have found one in Oregon that is, the bigger the woods, the bigger the organism.
Huh.
And it's also edible and also be called popinki. It's a fall version.
So that would be edible then?
Edible as well, very popular. And wild mushrooms, I might want to mention, once you know for sure that what it is and that you're going to eat it, cook it. In this case, cook it thoroughly. Because there are some mushrooms that are edible mushrooms, but they're not edible raw, and that includes the morel. So, next. These are called boletes, and that's the only common name I can give you. It's not real common. They are chubby mushrooms, generally speaking, and if you look at the underside, can't really see it in the photo, but they have pores rather than gills, tiny tubes. And this is the king bolete, which is a world-famous Steinpilz, porcini, cep, depending on the market you're in and what ethnic it is. These are sought after, probably more famous around the world than morels are. Grows with trees in association. And some boletes you don't eat, although this one is not poisonous. We stay away from the ones that have the reddish color on the underside. I just love the stem on this one. It's so decorative and pretty, in my opinion. And this one actually tastes like a lemon or citrus.
Really?
So it's a nice accompaniment to shrimp or lobster. And the puffballs. Most people think all puffballs are edible. Well, not exactly. But the general rule of thumb, if a puffball is bigger than your fist, then it's going to be edible. And there's a big one right there if you want to see.
Would that be edible?
This is not my photo, by the way. This is a photo. Yes, this is the giant puffball, the photo by Dan Moulter. And there are little puffballs that are edible, but there are some that have a hard coating on the outside of the puffball that's kind of like a texture of a football, and those are poisonous.
See, around here we call puffball the things that they look like that, or the little ones, but then you hit them and they break open and a whole bunch of stuff flies.
Well, when they're young, they're white, and that's when you eat them. Once they start to turn green or purple, they're bitter at that point. And eventually they become, the name puffball refers to puffing the spores out of them when you hit them. And if the spores if all the spores produced inside that puffball survived, the whole earth would be coated in puffballs. It would just be one big puffball.
Wow.
Fortunately, they don't all survive.
Yeah.
It's edible. It's not real strong flavored, kind of like tofu. Next. Okay, this is the chanterelle. This is the one I referred to. There are different chanterelles. This is one that you can, smells like apricots or peaches. And I've had sorbet and ice cream, and I've had them candied. You can have them with syrup and pancakes in the morning. You can also just saute them in butter. This is an underappreciated mushroom in Ohio. It's out there in there's different species. The next one, please. There we go. This is the one that's real common. If you've got an oak tree, you've got this probably. And it gets wormy, which makes it a problem. But it is abundant, and I've seen people from Europe come over here and they just go, "Oh my, why aren't people picking those?" Because it's such a special mushroom, and you can get it in fancy restaurants and so forth. Again, this is called the smooth chanterelle. This one is a fungus, but if you look at the bottom, there are fungi that are insectivorous, that actually grow on insects and kill them. And this one here, you can see the larvae that is being parasitized, and there's a whole group of fungi that kill insects, and including ants and a variety of other things. Just to show you some of the colors, most people, this is not an edible mushroom. I don't know that it's particularly poisonous, but it's not one that you would eat. Not because of the color, but I like the color. Purple mushrooms are kind of fun. Next.
I sent you a picture of those,
Did you? Okay.
and you identified it for me.
This is a mushroom that's sometimes or historically has been used as a fire starter, and it's called punk. It also is, I think sometimes it can be used to move coals from one place to another. Back when that was, once you got a fire started, it was hard. You didn't want to lose it. There's a, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, they found a man frozen in a glacier in the Italian Alps. He had an arrow in his back, and he'd fallen into a glacier, and he was preserved, frozen, till he was found, and now he's still frozen in a freezer somewhere. But they had, he had plants on him. They could tell what he had for dinner. They analyzed his, they knew he smelted, or near a copper smelting operation. They found a lot about him. He had this fungus with him, probably as a fire starter, and he was above the tree line, so he was carrying it specifically for that. And there's another fungus that we'll get to a little bit later that he also had on his person, which is even more interesting than starting a fire. Next. Okay, this is not a fungus, but we study these as well. This is a slime mold, which is a name called Myxomycetes. And it's interesting because it's kind of like an animal, kind of like a fungus, and if you have wood mulch around your house, you're likely to see this, although it'll grow in other places. And it can be a foot across, sometimes 2 foot across. It can be quite large, and the half animal part means that it moves. It actually moves around in a plasmodial movement, the fastest plasmodial movement of any organism known. And there's a story in the Audubon Guide that a lady in probably the Houston, Texas area had looked out her window, and this was out there in her yard, and the sun came out, shined on it, and wanting to stay moist, it very slowly but slithered over into the shade. So she looked out in her yard a few hours later, and what was over here was now over there, and she became upset with this whole phenomenon, so she called the fire department, and they came out with a fire hose. Now this is like tapioca pudding. If you tried to pick it up, your hand would go right through it. It's just goo. So they sprayed it with a fire hose, obliterated it, got back on the truck and laughed and went back to the station. Well, it's kind of like a fungus, so what it did was absorbed all that water, and it reformed out in her yard.
Okay.
And it got a lot bigger. They called the National Guard. And the National Guard came out, and I don't think there was any nuclear considerations, but they got a scientist in and said, no, it's eating bacteria and leaf mold, and the housewives of Houston, Texas are at no danger. But good story.
Excellent story. Actually, it sounds like a horror movie.
Yeah. Well, if you ever seen Ghostbusters?
Yeah. Recently.
This is kind of the slime.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go. You got it. So, okay. Now I said there aren't a lot of deadly poisonous mushrooms. This is one that is. This is called the autumn or deadly Gallerina. Again, lack of a common name. This one grows on wood, and one of the things it'll do, and some mushrooms will do this, there may be 3 kinds of mushrooms all out at the same time on the same log, and people gathering the honey mushroom, the pinky, they're going down picking mushrooms, and they're not looking at every one. These guys are small, inconspicuous, but they get put into the edible bag, and they cause the same poisoning as the amanita, as the destroying angel. And this one likes cool weather. It's been out now for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it'll probably disappear again until October, and then it'll come back out again. Second most popular mushroom in Ohio, at least in northeast Ohio, is sometimes in Ohio it's called sheephead. In most mushroom books it's called hen of the woods, both referring to the general appearance of what can be 20 pounds, 30 pounds. It can be a large mushroom. It grows at the base, usually of oak, living oak, or an oak stump, and it is a popular edible, and people of Italian descent really like this one because it's a great sauce mushroom. It holds like meat in the sauce, and I believe they call it nusk. I'm not sure of the derivation of that, but and it's one that I've seen the trunk of a car filled up from one tree. It can be enormous. Okay, we mentioned the fly mushroom. This is a laughing mushroom, or big laughing Jim. And this one is technically illegal to possess because it contains a controlled substance called psilocybin. And it referred to the 60s. This is not the mushroom of choice in the 60s, but the chemical is the same. This one is not a very strong intoxicant. It doesn't have a lot of the chemical in it. It also tastes extremely bitter, so it's not a popular mushroom for people to sample. And it is has a wonderful aroma, fragrance of almond extract or cherries, benzaldehyde, very sweet smelling. It is a interesting, you know, for the people that are into hallucinogenic things. It's definitely one that they would take and have to put honey on it or mustard on it. But and some of the other species of in the genus Psilocybe, which is the popular, again, illegal genus to eat or possess, you probably couldn't get arrested for possessing them unless you were selling them, and then that would get you in big trouble. There is a Johnny Appleseed effect that I've observed where people will pick them, get the soil they're growing in, and then from wherever in the country they're common, and then bring them home and take them to the police station and plant them in the flower bed outside the police station, so that technically the police are growing illegal mushrooms. So kind of funny, but you know. Next, we talked to actually I have some morels coming up, but this is a false morel, and again, don't eat a false morel. People say they look like morels. They don't. They're brain-like. They're wrinkled. They do contain.
Homely.
They're just a brain-like is the best way I can describe them. And this one probably wouldn't hurt you, but there is one that some people actually eat and get away with it after special preparation. They boil it, throw off the water, boil it, throw off the water. Don't breathe the steam coming off of it, and it contains a toxin that called monomethylhydrazine, and NASA uses that, or did use it, to put the space shuttle up. So it's actually rocket fuel.
Wow.
And it's water soluble, so boiling it, and I tell people, why play Russian roulette with a mushroom? It's just not worth it.
Right.
Next. One of my favorite edibles is this one. This one grows on beech trees and stumps and other kinds of maple and so forth, hardwood trees. It's called goat's beard, and it looks like whiskers hanging down, spines hanging down from the side of a tree.
I can't believe all these things that I've never noticed before.
But it's funny, when you tune into them, suddenly they're out there.
Yeah.
But you have to, tune into them, or happen to be out there. But mushrooms often fruit in weather that isn't conducive to being outdoors. It's muddy, it's wet, it's cloudy.
Damn.
And not the day where you think about taking a walk in the woods.
Right.
But when they're out in profusion, they're overwhelming. You can't put your foot down. But that doesn't happen very often. But this is a really good one, and a distinctive one. So if you remember that it has spines hanging down and not a coral growth growing up, because coral mushrooms can be poisonous. But this hangs down, spines like stalactites.
It's actually very pretty.
Oh yeah. Speaking of pretty, I
Those are too.
actually won a national photo contest with this one, mushroom photo contest only. And this is for a diagnostic field guide picture, not a pretty picture, but just a gorgeous, and this is the mushroom of one of the books that I've written, wax cap mushrooms. That's a wax cap mushroom there. And,
What's the name of your book, by the way?
well, the one that I recommend for folks is, and available through the Extension Office at Ohio State, is Mushrooms and Macrofungi of Ohio and the Midwestern States. It's not really a field guide, but it's got the common mushrooms in Ohio, like I'm showing here.
Hold that up.
And you can get it from them. Just Google Macrofungi Ohio, you'll get it, or get to the Extension Office at Ohio State University. And the other book is Wax Cap Mushrooms in North America, which is a specialized book that for folks that really want to get into one particular group of mushrooms, and that's one I wouldn't recommend for the average mushroom hunter.
Most of the ones that he's gone over today are covered in this book.
Yeah, I try to do mostly common. This one isn't, but most of
Because
them
I've been
are.
sitting here flipping as you've been calling them out, I've been flipping and they're there. So that's a fantastic resource.
And there are mushrooms that have latex. If you cut them, they have liquid that comes out of the gills. This one here is the common name, which comes out of West Virginia, is Bradley. I don't know what the derivation of that is, but it has so much milk, as we call it, that it'll run down your hand if you cut the gills. It is edible. There are some of these milk mushrooms that are if you taste the milk, it can be extremely acrid, hot, peppery, very biting taste. Not like a hot pepper, but equally as potent, biting. This one is mild. It has, to me, an unpleasant odor. It smells fishy, but that cooks out, so you don't get a fishy taste. It's not one that I like, but a lot of people really find this to be a really good edible. And again, there is a general rule with Lactarius, which is the genus, the mild taste of the latex, which you can taste raw. You don't eat it, you just taste it. And if it's mild, it goes into the edible bucket. If it's hot and acrid, some people eat those as well after special preparation. This one here, a lot of people call this one chicken mushroom, and I don't like the name because of the hen of the woods. They kind of are too close together, but I call it sulfur shelf, which refers to the sulfur yellow color. Very popular edible mushroom, one that's some people have trouble with this one, a little bit of digestive issues, and I think depending on the kind of tree that it grows on, it might have some effect. I had a friend who ate it growing on honey locust, which is a rare tree, not a common tree, and he got sick. And he's a scientist, so he went back and gathered it again and ate it again and got sick a second time. So he proved that it was a tree that did it, because he's eaten this mushroom many times on oak, which is where it usually grows. So sulfur shelf, chicken mushroom, May through October. Okay, here's what most people want to see. These are morels. There are half a dozen kinds in Ohio. The Latin names are changing due to DNA studies, and we're finding that American mushrooms are different than their lookalikes in Europe, but we've been using European names. But common names, there's lots of them for morels because they're so popular to eat when cooked again. I grew up collecting sponge mushrooms. If you go to Amish country, they pick merkles. You go to Kentucky, they pick landfish or dry land fish, or sometimes called hickory chickens or something like that. West Virginia, they're called molly moochers. There was an incident I just read about, and I don't know where in North America this occurred, but it was at a banquet, and the chef cut these up raw and put them on a salad. 75 people were poisoned. And can you imagine at a banquet
Yeah.
what a mess that would have been? And I'd like to find out more about that story, because it was a British book, but it referred to a North American incident. So anyhow, good mushroom to eat. Bad mushroom to eat is this one. This is the jack-o'-lantern. It's pumpkin colored, and like a jack-o'-lantern, it glows in the dark. So the gills give off a greenish white light. If you eat it about an hour later, you wish you hadn't. It would not kill you, but it would make you very sick. But it does, kind of a nice mushroom, good mushroom, not to eat, but for kids to take home and put in their room and watch it glow at night. Well, he had this mushroom threaded on a leather necklace, and the question was why? Well, this only grows on birch trees, and it turns out that Etsy had a stomach ache. He had a parasitic little tiny worm in his intestine, and it turns out if this chewed on, the juice of this mushroom is a natural antibiotic for that little parasitic worm. How he figured this out 15,000 years ago, I do not know, but it's kind of interesting. So, and you can go to the health food store now and you'll see one of the ingredients in some of the herbal remedies and pills, it'll say Iceman fungus, named after him. A lot of mushrooms are red, and people think they're easy to identify because they're bright red. There are a couple hundred in this genus that are bright red, and you can't identify them without a microscope in most cases. Critters like them. Mushrooms provide a food source for a variety of animals, turtles, squirrels.
Do they know if it?
Well, I think in some cases they do, but you can't trust because an animal eats it. That's another wives' tale. Because I've seen possum eat them and get sick.
Really?
In a controlled situation. So, but insects, slugs, box turtles just love them. Gray squirrel, big part of their diet is mushrooms. I've watched fox squirrels take mushrooms up in a tree, put it in the fork of a tree, presumably to let it dry, and then take it into, I didn't see them take it, but then it would go into their den where they have found That's a big part of a squirrel's den for food in the winter is dried mushrooms. So I think that's the last slide.
It was.
So,
It was.
so
Interesting stuff.
it's a fascinating hobby, and it's more than just eating mushrooms.
What did you do for work?
I was a social worker. I did
Yeah.
protective work for the elderly.
Really? Really? And then on your spare time, you got into this?
Got into this. My wife got me a book for Christmas one year, and the same year we got a whole Earth catalog which had a couple of mushroom clubs in it, and I joined the Ohio Club, and the leader of that club took me under his wing, Dick Grimm, who's still down in central Ohio, and with his help and my interest and going to events where there were lots of mushrooms, we could have a good weekend. We could have 200 kinds of mushrooms brought in to look at.
Wow.
So there's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Now, so that's how I've learned them, is going to events like that. And,
Is this the season then that you would be going out?
this is a slow season. There are some things, and because it's been raining a lot, there's things around. But
Right.
the season for diversity, for look at all the different things, is July. Starts in about the 4th of July.
No kidding.
And then builds up in through
I
October.
was going to say probably October is when I heard them.
October can be wonderful if you get the rain, but again, they're so dependent. It's worse than fishing. Fishing, you don't want it to rain the day you go. Well, mushrooming, you want it to rain before you go.
Yeah.
And if
yeah,
it
right.
doesn't, it doesn't rain for 2 weeks, you might as well stay home.
Really?
Well, unless you're looking at really little.
What's the lifespan of a mushroom?
Well, again, the little guys some of them can come and go overnight as far as the fruit. Now the mushroom's living happily in the ground.
Right.
But and the artist conch could live for years. So it varies from kind to kind. The average mushroom probably lasts about 2 weeks.
Is that right?
Yeah, before it totally falls apart.
Okay. Okay.
Walt's gonna go out to the outdoor learning center with us after we leave here.
Okay. Great.
Some-
You'll
yeah.
be- You'll really like that.
Give us some
Looking forward to
pointers.
it.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any out there.
I know with all this rain, I'm hoping.
We've had a ton of rain.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's
Flooding
gonna
rains in
be.
places coming up today.
Yeah, it was just bad. And then we had a pretty good dousing last night.
Right.
So you might have something out there. Well, very, very interesting stuff. I'm so glad I got a chance to meet you and listen to your segment here because it was interesting.
How does someone get a hold of you if they're
Yeah.
interested?
People email me by tracking me down at the Ohio Mushroom Society website, which you
That's
can
how I
Google
find it.
Ohio Mushroom Society.
Ohio Mushroom Society
Right.
site.
And again, appreciate emails, don't appreciate phone calls.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, because people don't respect time and so forth. So.
The book that you can get is through the
Ohio State University
Ohio State University
Extension.
Extension.
This
And
is in Jefferson on Wall Street, and I'll run down and get it for you if you're interested in getting it. I'll make sure they have copies of it, and I'll pick them up and bring them back.
so they are available through, is that the only place for them?
As far as I know, yes, other than, the author selling them out of their car.
The other book here, now this is for the expert, I guess, Wax Cap Mushrooms of Eastern North America. And
Beautiful picture. They're some of the
Yeah.
most beautiful mushrooms, but they're not
did
particularly.
you take your own pictures?
Some of them are mine. Some of them
Yeah.
are the other authors. The Ohio book are mostly mine.
Wow.
But there's a lot of pretty mushrooms out there.
And that's also available? Is that through Amazon?
That you can get on
Through the
Amazon.
library.
Okay.
It's pricey
Is it?
because it's all color pictures. But
Yeah.
This
oh,
I
yeah.
got through the library. Kathy,
Yeah, Kat's the one
did.
Kathy got you, right?
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised they had it.
Yeah. Well, she tracks down that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's very good. All right. Thank you so much, Walt, for coming in.